Okay, thanks a lot, Gabe. So it has been a journey this past year since I've been trying to go through these covenants, and I appreciate you showing up today to cover the priestly covenant. We've talked about covenants in the past, and just as a brief reminder about what is a covenant. Covenant's not a word we use in everyday speech. Usually, it has a biblical connotation. A lot of people try to say that covenant is the same as a contract, and it really is not. A covenant is really a commitment to a promise. So you have promises. Promises are something that God intends to do, where a covenant is something that God has committed himself to do. Now, with God, God is good as his words on a promise as he is with a covenant, but it's a demonstration to mankind that this is really, really important. Most covenants are ratified through shedding of blood in some way. The priestly covenant really is, most people have never heard of the priestly covenant. The three main covenants that most people are familiar with are the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, and the New covenant. And I call those the main covenants because those seem to be the most covenants that tie into the New Testament and the age of grace and the plan of redemption and that we're familiar with. But all the covenants, the other three covenants that I don't call the main covenants, the Noahic covenant, the priestly covenant, and the Davidic covenant. So we're going to cover the priestly covenant with a little bit of a hint toward the Davidic covenant. We'll do that next. All the covenants are part of God's plan of redemption, and all point toward the millennial kingdom and the future age to come. So today we're going to do the priestly covenant. So in looking at the nation of Israel and a lot of other nations, particularly in the Dark Ages and things, power within the nation of Israel was between two groups. One was the monarchy, and the other was a theocracy. So the monarchy was the king and all of the administration and stuff that the king would have, where the theocracy was the priests and all of the hierarchy with the chief priests and all the other priests that served in the kingdom and served in the temple. So you have these two divisions, and when God is establishing his covenant, the priestly covenant and the Davidic covenant, he's establishing these two organizations with two righteous men, David for the Davidic covenant and Phineas for the priestly covenant, to establish righteous men whose offspring will continue on in those positions on into the future. Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 33. And so I'm going to be, for people who are new, I'm going to be reading from the REV. The REV is the work that the ministry has been involved in. John Schoenheit and he has a committee that works on this. And so that's available from Spirit and Truth Fellowship. It's a free download or free, actually you have either through your app or online, you can go to stfonline.org and tap into the Bible there. And so that's where I'm going to be reading from today. And in Jeremiah, we're going to start at the end kind of and work a little bit back toward the beginning to establish the permanency of these covenants and how they come about. So in Jeremiah chapter 33, verse 19, the word of Yahweh came to Jeremiah saying, "This is what Yahweh says. If you can break my covenant of the day and my covenant of the night, so that there will not be day and night in their season." So he's linking the covenants to the permanency of the universe. You know, the orbit of the earth around the sun and the rotation of the earth, that's the permanency. If that goes away, then these covenants might not exist anymore. So in verse 21 then says, "Then," so if those things stop happening day and night, "then may also my covenant be broken with David my servant, that he will not have a son to reign on his throne, and with the Levites, the priests, my ministers." So those two covenants are established equally as far as permanency goes in relationship to the day and the night. Verse 22, as the army of heaven cannot be numbered, neither the sand of the sea measured, so will I multiply the seed of David, my servant, and the Levites who minister to me. So today we're going to delve more into the priestly covenant. So go to Psalm 106, and we'll see the reference to the priestly covenant in Psalms. Psalms is very good at reminding us about covenants and reminding us about God's faithfulness to the covenants. And we'll see in verse 1, it says, praise Yah, give thanks to Yahweh, for he is good, for his covenant faithfulness is everlasting. So God is faithful to his covenants for eternity. It says, who can tell of Yahweh's mighty deeds or fully declare all his praise? Blessed are those who maintain justice and practice righteousness at all times. Remember me, O Yahweh, in your favor toward your people. Visit me with your deliverance, that I may see the prosperity of your chosen people, that I may rejoice in the gladness of your nation, that I may celebrate with your inheritance. And in verse 4 or 5, we see if there's a formula for salvation, the formula is that God loves us, that we accept God's deliverance, and then we have hope and we look forward to the future. So in the New Testament, we learn that that's faith, hope, and love, or love, faith, and hope. And here it's remember, Yahweh, your favor toward me. So Yahweh gives us favor and visits me with your deliverance, and then I celebrate with your inheritance in the future. So this psalm goes down through the list of many times that the Israelites became unfaithful and how they became idolatrous and how they disobeyed God, but God was still faithful to his covenants. And the Bible calls that covenant faithfulness. So we get down to the section in that psalm that talks about the topic today, which is Phinehas and his righteous act that stopped the plague and saved Israel. And it says in verse 28, they, meaning the Israelites, even yoked themselves to Baal Peor, and we're going to learn about that. So the false god of Baal, and ate sacrifices offered to dead gods. Verse 29, so they made Yahweh angry by their actions, and a plague broke out among them. Verse 30, then Phinehas stood up and pronounced judgment, so the plague was restrained.
Wow.
And in verse 31, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness from generation to generation forever. So because of that righteous act of Phinehas, God made a covenant with him that we're going to see later on. That is for everlasting, from generation to generation. So who is this guy Phinehas? So we need to develop the backstory a little bit before we get to this righteous act that Phinehas did that led to the Davidic covenant. And that involves understanding the story of Balaam and Balak, the king of Moab, and the trickery and things that Balaam did to cause the trouble. But first I want to go to 1 Chronicles chapter 6. And this is just to look at the genealogy of Phinehas, so you get a little more picture of where he fits in and where the future fits in. So there's two priests that we have to pay attention to. It's Phinehas and Zadok. And Zadok is one of the great-grandchildren of Phinehas. So if you look in Chronicles chapter 6, verse 1, we can see that we're listing here the Levites. So Levite was one of the sons of Jacob, along with all the other sons. The Levites were going to be the priests. And so there was Levite, Kohath, Amram, Aaron, and Eleazar. So at the time that this is going on, Eleazar and his son Phinehas are active in the priestly duties among the tabernacle and what was set up with the law and everything. And so then you go further down into verse 8, and you finally get down to Zadok. Ahitub was the father of Zadok, and Zadok became the father of Ahimaaz. And Zadok was the priest at the time of David and Solomon. And Zadok was the first priest that ministered. He was the chief priest at the time of that the Solomon temple was built. So the first temple was built. Zadok was the chief priest at that time. And we're going to see ultimately that Zadok, his offspring, carries off on down the priestly line up into the millennial kingdom. So other people that we have to know about in the backstory of the priestly covenant are, I call them the 3 B's, because whenever I've heard this story in the past, I get them mixed up. So you got 3 B's. You got Balak, Balaam, and Baal. Okay, so Balak is the king of Moab. So Moab is where the Israelites are encamped after they came around, defeated the Ammonite or the Amorites, and they ended up camping in the plains of Moab. And Balak was the king of Moab. He saw the Israelites there. He became fearful that the Israelites were going to take over, and he hired Balaam to seduce the Israelites to follow Baal. So Balak is the first B. He's the king of Moab. Balaam, okay, he's the bad guy in this backstory. He's a non-Israelite prophet. And it's interesting, his relationship with Yahweh, and it seems like that sometimes that Yahweh, he followed Yahweh, and he called Yahweh his God, and at other times he was wicked and he followed divinity. He practiced divination, which we're going to learn about. He helped Balak to deceive the Israelites and put before them what's called a stumbling block, to commit sin through worshiping Baal. So he did those things. And when you read through the story that you're used to hearing about with the donkey and everything, it's not obvious that Balaam is such a bad guy, because it seems like, oh yeah, he blessed the Israelites. But we're going to show a couple of things in there that show what his heart really was. So anyway, he enticed the Israelites to commit sexual immorality and eat food sacrificed to Baal. And because of these sins, a plague fell on Israel and was active at the time that Phinehas did his righteous act. So let's get down to developing a little bit of what we know about Balaam. We know from scripture after this happened. So you don't have to go here, but I want to read to you 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 15. And it says, forsaking the right way, because this is Peter talking about false prophets, okay? He says, forsaking the right way, they, the false prophets, went astray, having followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wage of unrighteousness. So this is referring to when Balaam did his mischief, he was getting paid by Balak. He was receiving high honors, and he was receiving gold and silver. So he loved that more than he loved Yahweh. And then in Jude, in verse 11, again, Jude is writing about, this time, false teachers. And he says, woe to them, because they, the false teachers, walked in the way of Cain, and for the sake of profit, they have committed themselves to the error of Balaam. And they were destroyed in the rebellion of Korah. And then in Revelation, chapter 2, verse 14, in the letter to Pergamum, John writes in verse 14, but I have a few things against you, those folks in Pergamum, because you have there some who are holding the teaching of Balaam, the one who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. So this event that resulted in the priestly covenant is referred to multiple times throughout Scripture as an example of how evilness and wicked people are messing with the children of Israel and trying to stop the plan of redemption. And so we're seeing the things that we see today. Think of this through spiritual eyes, and think about what this means to God. God has this plan. He has the folks of Israel coming through the wilderness for 40 years, and they're getting ready to take over the land of Canaan. And here's all this stuff that starts happening because of evil people, and I'm sure that Satan is behind all this. Okay, and So we want to know ultimately what did happen to Balaam. In Joshua 13:22, this is describing what happened to Balaam. It says, the children of Israel killed with the sword Balaam, the son of Beor, the one who practiced divination, in addition to the rest of their slain. And this is referring to, after all this happened, Israel went to war with the Midianites in revenge and slayed everybody except the young virgins. And at the same time, they also took revenge on Balaam. And it's because he practiced divination. So Balaam did have some good things that he did. He blessed the Israelites instead of cursed them, but ultimately was responsible for their falling to and worshiping Baal. So Baal, we talked about him a little bit. He's the false god, and he was the god over the Moabites, but he was also the god of Midian and in the other region. He was one of the gods there, and he was a fertility god. So he was associated with sexual immorality. And Peor, into that, when they talk about the matter at Peor and Baal Peor, it refers to a mountain in Moab called Peor. And on that mountain were altars and high places and things that they set up for the worship of Baal. So let's get to the backstory of the priestly covenant. Now, I did want to start in Numbers 22. Numbers 22. In verse 1, it says, the children of Israel traveled and encamped in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan at Jericho. Now, I want to try to do some screen sharing, and Gabe, you may have to coach me a little bit to do this. I'm going to type the screen sharing button and see what happens here. Oh, you disabled it. Can you enable it?
Yeah. Okay, you should be able to now.
So here we go.
That's good to know. I didn't realize that Zoom made a change where only the host can screen share.
Okay, here we go.
We're in Numbers 22, verse 1, Michelle.
So this is different than I'm used to. How do I, oh, there we go. You see that? Can you all see the picture?
Yep.
Okay. So here's Egypt, where the Israelites started off. They, on the Exodus, they're leaving where the kingdom was, primarily in this region. They go over here to the Sinai Peninsula and they hike down through here and probably cross the Red Sea on this little projection that goes up this way. There was if you see some of those movies about that, there was kind of a point where the Red Sea is not very deep right across there. Would have been a good place for them to go across. Anyway, they cross over into Arabia and they come up here into the Judean region, okay? And if I blow this up a little bit, oops, too much. So you can see here the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee is up in here. So they're coming around this way and they land right in this region right here. And I don't know if I can show you the other, let's see if this will pop up here. Okay, can you see that one?
No, Doug. You have to you'll have to re-screen share and choose the other image.
New share. Did that work?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, so they're coming up into this region in here. They do defeat the Amorites, which is one of the things that scared Balak. But they come around Moab and they come in this way. And then they encamp right here so here's the Jordan River. This is the Sea of Galilee. Jordan River goes down to the Dead Sea. They encamp right in here in the plains of Moab. And there's a place there called Shittim. That's a region. It may actually be a city too, but there's a region in here is called Shittim. If you look across the Jordan River over here is Jericho. So they stay there for quite a while. I don't know exactly how long, but it's months and months and months and months. They stay there before they finally go across. And the reason that we think it's months and months, one of the reasons is that we're going to find out that Balaam He lived way up here in Syria or somewhere in Iraq, up on the Euphrates River. So when the king of Moab is sending for Balaam, he's sending all these people on their donkeys all the way up here, 300 and some miles, to see Balaam. Balaam says, nah, I don't think I want to. They have to go all the way back down. And then the king of Moab increases the offer. They go all the way back up, give him another offer. And he says, okay. And he comes all the way back down. So, you know, that when he's on his donkey, he's making this trip up and down through here. And so it's a long way. So there, you know, things lasted a long time. So I want to just kind of give you that perspective of where these things were. So now I'm going to stop sharing. Hey, okay, that worked okay. So Shittim, just to remind people that they were in Shittim for a long time. Shittim was where, after the events that we're going to read about with Phinehas, they went to war against the Midianites and wiped them out. That all came from while they were at Shittim. And the journey across the Jordan to begin the invasion of Canaan began at Shittim. So that's where they are when they're sitting in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan. They're sitting in this area called Shittim, and that'll come up again a little bit later. So in Numbers 22, we're going to read through this account. And it says, verse 2, Balak the son of Zippor saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was very afraid of the people because they were many. And Moab was distressed because of the children of Israel. Moab said to the elders of Midian, now this multitude will lick up all that is around us as an ox licks up the green plants of the field. Balak the son of Zippor was the king of Moab at this time. Now Midian, from what I can gather, it really isn't a focal country or a focal area. It was probably a confederacy of multiple tribes and had more than one king. But anyway, so the king of Moab, Balak, and the leaders of Midian recognized that they had a mutual problem, though, when they started this. So in verse 5, Balak, sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, to Pethor. So Pethor is this town up on the Euphrates River. That is by the river, to the land of the children of his people, to call him, saying, behold, there's a people who came out of Egypt. Behold, they cover the surface of the earth, and they are staying opposite me. Verse 6, please come now, therefore, curse this people for me, because they are too mighty for me. Then perhaps I may prevail that we may strike them, and that I may drive them out of the land, for I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed. So Balaam must have been a very well-known wizard, you know, that the king of Moab had heard about it. He sent his messengers all the way up there to Mesopotamia to get him to come down and help him out. So in verse 7, the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the rewards of divination in their hands. So they had all the gold and silver. They're dragging it with them up to Pethor to pay off Balaam. And they came to Balaam and they spoke to him the words of Balak. He said to them, this is Balaam talking, lodge here this night, and I will bring you word again as Yahweh will speak to me. The officials of Moab stayed with Balaam. God came to Balaam and said, who are these men with you? Balaam said, Balak the son of Zippor, king of Moab, has said to me, behold the people that has come out of Egypt. It covers the surface of the earth. Now come, curse them for me, because I may be able to fight against them and drive them out. So this is God's first response to the request to curse the Israelites. God said to Balaam, you are not to go with them. You are to curse the people. You are not to curse the people, for they are blessed. So Balaam rose up in the morning and said to the officials of Balak, he says, go to your land, go back home, for Yahweh refuses to permit me to go with you. The officials of Moab rose up and they went to Balak all the way back down, right, to Moab, and said, Balaam refuses to come with us. So Balak says, okay, we're going to offer him more. We're going to offer him some more money. We're going to offer him some more power. We're going to try to get him to come. And so he picked his higher up officials. So the first time he just sent the lower class officials. Now he's sending the vice president. And he says, Balak send yet again officials more and more honorable than they. They came to Balaam and said to him, this is what Balak the son of Zippor says, please let nothing hinder you from coming to me. for I will promote you to a very great honor, and whatever you say to me, I will do. So please come and curse this people for me. Verse 18, Balaam answered the servants of Balak, if Balak would give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the word of Yahweh my God to do less or more. Now therefore, please wait also here this night that I may know what Yahweh will speak to me more. So this is God's second response. So in verse 20, God came to Balaam at night and said to him, pay attention carefully what God wanted Balaam to do. It says, if the men have come to call you, rise up and go with them, but only the word that I speak to you, that you must do. So call you were the operative words there. So God wanted them to wait, wanted Balaam to wait until the men called him, and then he could get up and go. So let's see what Balaam did. So in verse 21, Balaam rose up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the officials of Moab. So he didn't wait, right? He didn't wait for it to be called. He was anxious to go. He wanted to get that money and get that high honor. So he just saddled up his donkey and off he goes. So recognize that he did disobey God at this time. So in verse 22, what's God's response? God's anger was kindled because he went. He went without being called. God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of Yahweh placed himself in the road as an adversary against Balaam. Now he was riding on his donkey, and his two servants were with him, so he's on his way back down to Moab. And the donkey saw the angel of Yahweh standing in the road with his sword drawn in his hand. And the donkey turned aside out of the road and went into the field. Balaam struck the donkey to turn her into the road. A wall being on this side and a wall on that side. The donkey still saw the angel, but Balaam didn't. And she thrust herself to the wall and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall. And he struck her again, whacked her again, stupid donkey. And then in verse 26, the angel of Yahweh went further and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn either to the right hand or to the left. The donkey still sees the angel, and she lay down under Balaam. So she just got down on the ground and said, no, we're not going any further. And Balaam gets mad. His anger was kindled, and he struck the donkey with his staff. Stupid donkey. So in verse 28, so Yahweh opens the mouth of the donkey, and we see that God can speak to people through animals. And the donkey she said to Balaam, what have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times? Balaam said to the donkey, because you have mocked me. I wish there were a sword in my hand, for now I would have killed you. The donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey on which you have ridden all your life long to this day? Was I ever in the habit of doing so to you? Balaam says, no. In verse 31, then Yahweh opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of Yahweh standing in the road with his sword drawn in his hand, and he bowed his head and fell on his face. So when an angel is standing there with his sword, that's a big deal. He's not just like the angel coming to Mary. He's there. You're not going anywhere, buddy. I'm mad at you. And in verse 32, the angel of Yahweh said to him, why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out as an adversary because your way is perverse before me. Your way, Balaam, is perverse before me. So what's perverse mean? Perverse is showing a deliberate and obstinate desire to behave in a way that is unreasonable or unacceptable, often in spite of the consequences. So Balaam's not this nice guy. He's got some issues there. He's perverse before Yahweh. Verse 33, and the donkey saw me, turned aside before me. This is the angel talking. Turned aside before me these 3 times. Unless she had turned aside from me, surely now I would have killed you and saved her alive. Balaam said to the angel of Yahweh, I have sinned, for I did not know that you stood in the road against me. Now therefore, if it displeases you, I will go back. Verse 35, the angel of Yahweh said to Balaam, go with the men, but you are to speak only the word that I tell you. So Balaam went with the officials of Balak. So verse 36, so Balaam finally gets down to Moab, and when Balak heard that Balaam had come, he went out to meet him in the city of Moab, that is on the border of Arnon, that is in the utmost part of the border. And Balak said to Balaam, didn't I earnestly send to you to call you? Why didn't you come? And I am not able indeed to promote you. Am I not able indeed to promote you to honor? And Balaam said, behold, I have come to you. How have I now any power at all to speak anything? The word that God puts in my mouth, that I must speak. Okay, now these words, right, what Balaam says right now is important. I just don't know how to fit it in perfectly, okay? So this is what Balaam is saying. The word that God puts in my mouth, that I must speak. So when Balaam goes on to do the blessings for the people of Israel, the first two blessings, he receives his revelation or whatever it is through divination. And he uses these exact same words. The word that God puts in my mouth, that I must speak. He says, it says God put the words in his mouth. Whereas the last two blessings came from the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God was on Balaam, and he spoke the last two blessings. So these are important words. The word divination is the Hebrew word nakashim, N-A-C-H-A-S-H-I-M, nakashim. And it stands for enchantments is the way that the REV translates it later on. I'm just going to read to you what the commentary says about this. That it's not enchantments in the sense of magical practices, but definitely arguaries. Those are omens and signs in the natural world observed and interpreted according to an artificial system as manifesting the purposes of God. So when Balaam is practicing divination, that is what he's doing. He is looking for omens and signs in the natural world that he interprets according to an artificial system as manifesting the purposes of God. It's one of the commonest and worst of heathen practices. It was forbidden in the law and held up to reprobation. So this divination thing that Balaam is doing is not so good. So verse 39, back to Numbers 22. Balaam went with Balak, and they came to Kirioth Huzoth. Balak sacrificed cattle and sheep and sent to Balaam and the officials who were with him. It came to pass in the morning that Balak took Balaam and brought him up to the high places of Baal. So they're going up the mountain. They go to 3 different mountains, all of which were used to worship Baal. And when he got there, he saw from there the utmost part of the people, the Israelites that were camped at Shittim. In Numbers 23, verse 1, it says, Balaam said to Balak, build me 7 altars and prepare me 7 bulls and 7 rams. And Balak did that. In verse 2, Balak and Balaam offered on every altar a bull and a ram. And Balaam said to Balak, stand by your burnt offering and I will go. Perhaps Yahweh will come to meet me, and wherever he shows me, I will tell you. So again, that is, to me, referring to the enchantments, the wizardry that he's going to do. Whatever he shows me, that's what I'm going to tell you. So went up to a place where there wasn't anything, a bare place. And God met Balaam, and he said to him, Balaam said this, I prepared the 7 altars, and I have offered up a bull and a ram on every altar. In verse 5, Yahweh put a word in Balaam's mouth and said, return to Balak, and thus you are to speak. So Yahweh put a word in Balaam's mouth. A lot of sub-commentaries thought that was still God speaking to Balaam. But that's curious to me, is that phrase later on is blamed from divination. So I don't know. So he spoke the first blessing. I'm not going to read that to just save some time. And we get down to verse 14. So remember, Barak wanted him to curse the Israelites, but what happened? Balaam blesses them instead. And so in verse 14, Balak took him to the field of Zophim to the top of Pisgah. Pisgah is another mountain. And from there, he could see the Israelites still. He looks down these mountains. If you've ever been on the trip to Mount Nebo, where you can look down over the plains of Moab. It's a long way off, but you can see that whole area from those mountains. And he built 7 more altars and offered up a bull and a ram on every altar. And he said to Balak, stand here by your burnt offering while I meet over there. Yahweh met Balaam and again put a word in his mouth and said, return to Balak, and said the blessing. So in Numbers 23, so Balaam has blessed twice now the Israelites. Numbers 23, verse 27. Balak said to Balaam, now he's getting pretty perturbed now because he's paid this money and he's done all these things, and Balaam is not cursing him. He says, come now, I'll take you to another place. Perhaps it will please God that you may curse them from there. Curse me, them from there. And so he's frustrated. And so in verse 28, Balak took Balaam to the top of Peor that looks down on the desert. Again, he could see the Israelites. In verse 1 in chapter 24, when Balaam saw that it pleased Yahweh to bless Israel. So Balaam had seen that God was happy with him, even though he had practiced his divination, he had still blessed Israel. He was pleased that Yahweh to bless Israel. He did not go, as at other times, to meet with enchantments. So there's a distinction here, that the other 2 blessings, he met with enchantments. But he set his face toward the wilderness. So in verse 2, and Balaam lifted up his eyes, and he saw Israel dwelling according to their tribes. And this time the Spirit of God came on him. So this time he's going to bless with the Spirit of God on him. And he spoke the 3rd blessing. So then in verse 10, Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam, and he struck his hands together, and Balak said to Balaam, I called you to curse my enemies, and behold, you have altogether blessed them these 3 times. Therefore now flee to your place. I thought to promote you to great honor, but behold, Yahweh has kept you back from honor. Balaam said to Balak, did I not also tell your messengers who you met to me, saying, if Balak would give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the word of Yahweh to do either good or bad of my own mind. I will say what Yahweh says. Now behold, I go to my people. Come, I will let you know what this people will do to your people in the last days. And so he had one more, a 4th blessing for the people of Israel. But you can see that things aren't right, even though it seems like on the surface that he's being compliant and he's blessing the children. There's something still not right. So you kind of have to be a detective and kind of see those things. And we know from other places in Scripture that Balaam loved the wages of unrighteousness, that he taught Balak how to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel. So this is what's happening between the blessings of the Israelites and ultimately the story that we get into called the matter of Peor, where Phinehas ultimately has an act of righteousness and receives a priestly covenant. And then finally, one more thing we know about Balaam is after all this happened and the Israelites go defeat the Midianites, they kill everybody except for the women, and they bring the women back to Moses, which was not what he had instructed them to do. And he's standing there in front of the women, and he says, behold, these women on the advice of Balaam. Now you don't have to go, this is Numbers 33, verse 16. These women on the advice of Balaam caused the children of Israel to trespass against Yahweh in the matter of Peor. And so there was a plague among the congregation of Yahweh. So we know from these other instances what Balaam was doing in the background, that he was working with Balak to come up with a scheme to entice the Israelites to sin and to start worshiping Baal and to practice their idolatry. And so we finally get to the story here in Numbers 25 that's entitled The Baal Worship at Peor in the REV. In verse 1 it says, Israel stayed in Shittim. That's the plains of Moab. And the people began to play the prostitute with the daughters of Moab. So playing the prostitute is, in the worship of Baal, involved both physical sex and being pulled into the worship of pagan gods, and much of the worship of pagan god involved ritual prostitution. And why did they do that? Because of the scheme of Balaam and Balak. Verse 2, for they called the people to the sacrifices of their gods, called the Israelites, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So the people of Moab called the Israelites to the practice of their gods, and the Israelites were seduced into that. And they ate food that had been sacrificed to Baal, and they were just way off track then. Again, due to the scheming of Balaam. So in verse 3 it says, Israel yoked himself to Baal Peor. So that yoke, they became united together. Worst thing you can do, right? And the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Israel. In verse 4, Yahweh said to Moses, this is God talking to Moses, take all the headmen of the people and hang them up to Yahweh before the sun, that the fierce anger of Yahweh may turn away from Israel. And verse 5, this is Moses. So God said to Moses, verse 4, and in verse 5, Moses said to the judges of Israel, everyone kill his men who have yoked themselves to Baal Peor. Whew. That's pretty tough love there. Now, what does that mean? The head men, where it says, take the head men of the people and hang them up. So the head men are the men in charge, the top men, the men who are responsible for the idolatry. Either the people actually doing the idolatry and also the people who were in charge or people over top of that. But apparently the judges, the ultimate 70 council people remain pure. And those are the ones that were instructed to kill his men. Now I want to read to you from Deuteronomy chapter 21, because it explains this verse here about when it says, hang them up to Yahweh before the sun. Hang them up to Yahweh before the sun. So in general, what that would mean is that there had to be a process of determining guilt. So the guilty people would have to be brought before the judges, and they would determine who was guilty. Those people then would pay the price of being executed, and then they would be hung up on a tree so that everybody could see them as an example that they had sinned and that they had been executed. And then they would stay there all day, and then they would be taken down at sunset and buried. So some people have said, and some interpreters talk about that the Israelites impaled the people on poles and things like that. But as far as we can tell, that's really not the way that the Israelites did that. And I'm just going to read from Deuteronomy chapter 21 that this is from the law in verse 22. It says, if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, such as what happened here, and he be put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body is not to remain all night on the tree. So in this verse 22, it says you put them to death and then you hang them on a tree. You're not crucifying anybody. You're not impaling them, where you insert a rod up through the bottom end. And the body is not to remain all night on the tree, but you are to surely bury him the same day, so that you do not defile your land that Yahweh your God gives you for an inheritance. Now, we've seen that language before with Christ, right? That everybody who hangs on a tree is cursed. So same language, it comes from the law. And that Christ was taken down before sunset. And then also in 2 Samuel, where God is speaking to David about his sin with Bathsheba through Nathan, he says, for you did it secretly, talking to David. You did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. So same language. It just means before the sun means in the daylight, in the broad daylight, so everybody can see it, that these people, these sinners were committing apostasy against God and that they paid the ultimate price.
Where in 2 Samuel were you, Doug?
Well, I was just reading, so that's 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 12. You don't have to go there. I was just reading that. So that's part of David and Nathan's story when Nathan confronted David about his sin. Just to kind of explain that phrase before the sun, what that means. Okay, so now we're down to verse 6 in Numbers 25. It says, "Behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought to his brothers a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting." So here is a person who apparently escaped the penalty so far, and he is out hanging around with the Midianite prostitutes hanging at the temple of Baal or whatever the site is. And he brings one of those women back with him right into the camp, right up to the congregation where the people are hanging out at the tent of meeting. So whether or not this was a Sabbath or not, some people have suggested that maybe it was, but the people are congregating at the tent of meeting, and they were weeping, apparently because of the sin that they did, the plague that was going on, the punishment that had happened to several of the people that happened in their congregation. And so they're weeping, and here this guy brings this prostitute with him into the tent of meeting. So in verse 7, when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he rose up from the middle of the congregation. He took a spear in his hand and he went after the man of Israel into the pavilion. So he went inside where the man was having sex with the woman in there. And he thrust both of them through while they were laying there. And the man of Israel and the woman through her body. He thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her body. So the plague was stayed from the children of Israel. So that righteous act, that was the righteous act that leads to the priestly covenant and ended the plague. And in verse 9, it says, "Those who died by the plague were 24,000. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned my wrath away from the children of Israel by being zealous with my zeal among them, so that I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal." So it's believed here that Phinehas was already a righteous guy, that God had already chosen Phinehas for special rewards, because he just didn't become righteous in that moment. He was already righteous. He was already in a relationship with God when he did this, and he was zealous for God. In verse 12, it says, "Behold, I give to him my covenant of peace." Peace meaning that the stopping of the plague. 13, "And it will be to him and to his seed, all of his descendants in the future, after him, the covenant of an everlasting priesthood." So God is making a covenant then with Phinehas and his descendants of an everlasting priesthood. So the descendants of Phinehas would be part of this organization of priests that carry forward all the way into the millennial kingdom, and ultimately through Zadok, of somebody who had held a righteous act and that God can trust him and his offspring, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the children of Israel. So there was an atoning sacrifice. Again, this is another type for Christ, that Christ made an atoning sacrifice for all of us because of the sins that were committed under the law. And this is an example of an atoning sacrifice from two human beings being sacrificed to end the plague and to restore God's relationship with Israel. And also when we're looking for covenants, we're looking for ratification through blood. And again, the death of these two people is a blood covenant that God is making with Phinehas. So Phinehas was jealous for God, and God had already chosen him and confirmed and ratified this covenant. And I want to just cover one more thing, talking about the millennial kingdom. So go to Ezekiel chapter 44. And this describes the functioning of the temple in the millennial kingdom. And Gabe maybe later can talk about, because I was talking the other day about with Gabe, is there are going to be sacrifices in the millennial kingdom? And if there are, why? But this talks about there being sacrifices in the millennial kingdom. This is Ezekiel 44, beginning with verse 15. Oh, verse 10, verse 10. It says, and as for the Levites who went far from me when Israel went astray. So this is the prophet talking, revealing what God says about the Levites, the other Levites besides Phinehas, when they went astray. For me, after their idols, they will bear their iniquity. Yet they will be ministers in my sanctuary. So God is still going to let them be a minister. Having oversight at the gates of the house, they can do the gates and they can minister in the house. And they'll kill the burnt offerings and will sacrifice for the people, and they will stand for them to minister to them. But because they ministered to them before their idols and became a stumbling block of iniquity to the house of Israel, therefore I have lifted up my hand and sworn against them, says the Lord Yahweh, and they will bear the consequences of their iniquity. Verse 13, they will not come near to me to serve as a priest to me, nor to come near to any of my holy things, to think to the things that are most holy. But they will bear their shame and the consequences of the abominations that they have committed. Yet I will appoint them to keep charge of the house, of all its service, of all that will be done in it. But the Levitical priests, the sons of Zadok, all the way down, who performed the duty of my sanctuary when the children of Israel went astray from me, they will come near to me to minister to me, and they will stand before me to offer me the fat and the blood, says the Lord Yahweh. They may enter into my sanctuary, and they may come near to my table to minister to me, and they will keep my instruction. So that's the line of Zadok, looking forward to the future millennial kingdom. So that's all I have to present today. I know that was a lot, but I hope that brought some understanding into the priestly covenant, how that came about, what the backstory was on all that. And it's interesting to me how through time, Satan is constantly trying to disrupt the plan of redemption. Even now, we're talking so many ministries that happen and they fail because of sexual immorality and different things like that. That Satan seems to like to use that as like the big tempter to draw men away from God and stop movements of God at times. So anyway, any questions on any of that?